Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Jeune, at the real Jon Jeune _FF on IG and X. It is Tuesday, February 11th, 2025, and the 2024 NFL season is officially over as the Philadelphia Eagles defeat the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 59 by a score of 40-22. The Eagles absolutely dominated this game. I know I came on here 2 weeks ago talking about this game, and I was calling the Eagles Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. You don't know which Eagles team is going to show up. And, Patrick Mahomes, I'm just not betting against him. Just feel like he can, he could weather any storm. And his teams don't look particularly great in the regular season. They stumble to 15-2, and then they make the playoffs, and then he goes on a run. And I thought he would continue to do that. That clearly did not happen. The Eagles had a phenomenal game plan defensively. Vic Fangio, just an absolute mastermind. And it wasn't, as you're watching the TV copy, right, it wasn't overly complicated, right? They blitzed Mahomes 0 times on 42 dropbacks. They sacked him 6 times. It was possibly Mahomes' worst game as a pro, and it's like it actually kind of reminded me of Tom Brady, right? Back in like 2007 and 2011, right? That's when they lost those Super Bowls to the Giants, and I remember at that time, right, Tom Brady seemed to be invincible, and it was like there's no way, he could lose a Super Bowl, right? There's no way he could lose to a wild card team in the Giants, and all it took was a team with the ability to rush with 4, and get pressure on Tom Brady, and that's what we saw in this game here with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. As they were basically dominated the Eagles defensive front between Josh Sweat and Milton Williams and Jalen Carter. Stat line, I think he didn't really have eye-popping numbers in this game to make you think like, oh, okay, well, he's a big reason as to why they won this game. But there was a lot of attention on Jalen Carter throughout the game, which I think allowed some of these other guys like a Josh Sweat, like a Milton Williams, to get these one-on-one opportunities. And if you've been watching the Chiefs all year, you've been paying attention, one of the biggest weaknesses they have is at the offensive tackle, right? They've been shuffling guys around. They've been trying to find the perfect combination of offensive tackles. And, it really showed itself in the Super Bowl on Sunday. And this game was never really in doubt for the Eagles. Once they got the pick 6, Cooper Kupp on his birthday, once they got the pick 6 there, went up 17-0, it was pretty evident that it would be a long day for Kansas City. Travis Kelce played poorly. Mahomes, he couldn't create even when he was trying to get out the pocket, create with his legs. The Eagles, that defensive front was all over him. They couldn't get the run game going, or they didn't even really try to get the run game going. So all in all, it was just a great defensive game plan by the Eagles. On KC, on their defensive side, they were, primarily focused on Saquon Barkley and stopping him, which, understandably so. At only 25 carries for 57 rushing yards. But that allowed the Eagles, to take advantage of some other opportunities, right? Jalen Hurts, who ends up winning the Super Bowl MVP, Um, he had 221 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, just one interception, but also carried the ball 11 times for 72 yards and a touchdown there on the ground. So, all in all, a very solid game there by Jalen Hurts, who I think, for all the crap that he takes, right? Uh, people say he's not a good quarterback and he's terrible, this and that, right? Do I think he's a great passer? No, I do not. But the NFL is the quarterback position specifically. One thing matters above anything is, do you win football games? Right? Are you a winner? When do you make the plays when they count? And Jalen Hurts is 46-20. And people are like, oh well, if they didn't invent the tush push, he'd be useless, or he'd be flipping burgers or something like that. And look, I get it. I understand why people dislike the tush push. I don't particularly care for it, but I'm also not like, hey, the Eagles are so good at it, let's take it out, right? It's like, then I know people are probably gonna be like, oh, it's not the same thing, but the forward pass was illegal for a long time, right? And imagine if after they put it in, and one team was just so much better at it than all the other teams, that they said, maybe we should take that out, right? And I get it. You're not gonna the forward pass makes the game exciting and all these other things, right? And the tush push is not. I do have some other reservations about the tush push in terms of like the league's, how the league. It's almost like the defense is being punished for it. When you watch what happened with the Commanders and Frankie Louvu, um, so that I don't particularly like. But Jalen Hurts, I think the Eagles, they do a great job of running that play. Um, at some point or another, somebody's gonna have to figure out how to stop them. But when I look at Jalen Hurts, like, he's a winner, 46-20 in 66 career starts, right? Two Super Bowl appearances, one Super Bowl champion, one Super Bowl MVP, right? I don't know how you can look at this guy and say he's not good, or he's not a good quarterback. I mean, all he's been doing is winning, right? And so, I think Jalen Hurts deserves some respect for winning the Super Bowl. And again, he had to make some big time plays with his legs, had to make some big time throws down the field, specifically the one to Jahan Dotson early, to start the game, and then the one to Devontae Smith to basically ice the game, right? Put the nail in the coffin there. When the Chiefs are getting a little bit of life and they're starting to, um, they just scored a touchdown, right? And they're starting to get some life again, and then, you know, they put the dagger in them pretty much. So, um, all in all, I thought it was a solid game. I wish it would have been more competitive, but in terms of when you watch, just watching football, watching um, a defensive coordinator like Vic Fangio just be in his bag all day to stop an offense like Mahomes and Andy Reid, where they just didn't have an answer, right? They did not have an answer. Maybe I'm a little biased, but me being having a defensive background, having played defense in college, and having been a defensive coordinator at the high school and semi-pro level, I gravitate towards performances like that. So it was good to see. Again, I would have preferred to see a more competitive game, but again, you get what you get, right? So, what does 2025, 2026 look like? Right? Vegas has already put out the Super Bowl odds for next season, And the top 5 teams, number 1, Philadelphia Eagles at plus 600. Not surprising. They just won the Super Bowl, so they typically would end up as the um, as the favorites there. Kansas City and Baltimore are tied with the second highest odds, plus 650. So, two AFC teams right there with basically with equal odds there to reach the Super Bowl. Kansas City basically would be reaching the Super Bowl for the fourth straight year. And it looks like, based on what Vegas is saying, we get a rematch between Kansas City and Philadelphia. And then Buffalo comes in at 4th with odds of plus 750. Again, not surprising there, with Buffalo having made it to the AFC Championship game, and been knocking on the door of trying to get to the Super Bowl for a while now. And then you've got the Detroit Lions coming at 5th with odds of plus 1,000, right? Detroit, I feel like, you could make an argument that they should be a little bit higher. You could see them being possibly higher here. But, a year where they lost both their coordinators, offensive and defensive, their coaching staff got, pretty much purged with all the hirings. It might be a little tough for them to replicate the success that they've had in recent years. So, that being said, y'all, make sure you are subscribed, whether you're watching on YouTube, X, Twitch, IG Live, or you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or you're watching on Spotify as well. Make sure you are tapped in. Make sure you are following, liking, subscribing, commenting, interacting. Goes a long way to help the show out. Doesn't cost you anything. So if you guys could do that, definitely would appreciate that so very much. Now, what does today look like? Probably could have led with that, but here we are. We recapped the Super Bowl. We talked about some Super Bowl favorites. I'm just going to give some news updates. I'm thinking it's going to be a quick show here. Going to give some news updates there, and then that will be it. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about some other stuff. The combine's coming up as well, so we'll look at what the next couple weeks will look like here. But we're going to jump into some news right now, NFL news updates. And I think that the lead here, probably Kellen Moore to the Saints, right? We've been expecting this one. I know the last time I was on here 2 weeks ago, we talked about NFL coaching changes, and this was the last job that has yet to been filled. And I think I said on here it was down to Mike McCarthy or Kellen Moore at the time, and I was pretty confident Kellen Moore would get that job. And it's pretty much been reported that he's expected to take that job. So I think when you're hiring a team like the Saints hires an offensive mind like Kellen Moore, automatically everyone starts wondering, okay, well, who's the quarterback there? How do they fit into the system? So Derek Carr is there. What's going to happen with Derek Carr? I've seen that the Saints could release him. Is it possible that they try to trade him? That part I'm not really sure. I actually don't even know what the implications of a trade would be. Does he have a no trade clause? There's already a ton of news about what is expected to happen with Derek Carr. So I think that's one thing to look out for. And then the next question would be, well, if the Saints move on from Derek Carr, then who would be the quarterback? And I think right now the favorite for that would possibly be Spencer Rattler, right? The rookie. He, think he had an up and down. When he first got his opportunities, it did not look too great. but he was a rookie thrown into the fire. When he came back in about near the end of the year, it was like you started seeing some stuff where it was like, okay, this kid has a little, he could play a little ball, right? And I think I know I knew that, right, with Spencer Rattler, that he was capable of making some plays, and he's talented for sure. But could he play the quarterback position? And I think getting him with a guy like Kellen Moore, you kind of get to answer that question, right? The Saints picked ninth in the NFL draft. That's not really territory for them to draft one of these quarterbacks highly. Whether it be Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders. Um, I don't think it's a class you want to trade up for one of these guys. So I think they stand pat at ninth. See what Spencer Rattler is in 2025. Use this pick and some of your other assets to build up this roster, and then in 2026 you can reassess the quarterback position again. But again, I think if you bring in a guy like Kellen Moore because of what he can mean for the quarterback position. Moving on to the next headline, we've got Cooper Kupp. The Rams are possibly looking to trade wide receiver Cooper Kupp, who's entering his age 32 season. Teams trading for him would be expected to take on the remainder or most of his contract, which has a base salary of almost $14 million annually the next 2 years. And also, he's due a $7.5 million roster bonus in March if he's traded prior to that March deadline. So, otherwise, if he's still on the roster, I think it's likely the Rams would just outright release him, so they don't have to pay him that $7 million roster bonus. But I think they're willing to take on some of the salary, considering what they if they can get compensation in return. You don't want to just let a good player like Cooper Kupp go for nothing. So even if you can net back a 4th round pick, which is what has kind of been discussed, because that was what Keenan Allen went for last year when he got traded from the Chargers to the Bears. And there was some kind of a similar situation. Actually, Keenan Allen, I think, was owed more money. I think it was like $18 million, I think he had remaining on that 1 year. And so, if that netted a 4th round pick, you're looking at Cooper Kupp, who's age 32, has dealt with some injuries similar to like a Keenan Allen. Although for some reason, I feel like I would have rather had Keenan Allen for the 4th than Cooper Kupp for a 4th. And I'd rather pay Keenan Allen the extra money than Cooper Kupp, as crazy as it sounds, because I know Cooper Kupp is a great player as well in his own right. So is Keenan Allen. It's just, I don't know. There's something about the injuries with Cooper Kupp that make me weary there. So teams that seem like a good fit, right? I think, I think people are going to throw out, teams like Tennessee, which I don't think that would ever happen. They need wide receiver help. New England needs wide receiver help. I don't know if that happens. Does he go to, is Washington interested, right? They need a running mate with Terry McLaurin. They're a contending team, right? So there's that aspect of it. I think the lines have been thrown around, Jared Goff reunion, right? So, see what happens there. The teams like the Chargers could also be interested. I think Denver, hearing Sean Payton talk the other day, he feels pretty good about his wide receiver group. So, the Steelers, the Bills, the Texans, right? So it really comes down to how these other teams, view Cooper Kupp relative to the rest of the market, right? And it's going to be interesting because their competition is, people are going to think about, oh, well, T. Higgins is also on the market, right? But it's not just the free agents. It's the guys that are available via trade as well, right? So a guy like Devontae Adams, right? Like, could you would you rather Devontae Adams in his age 32 season or Cooper Kupp? And I'm sorry, I would take Devontae Adams, but um, well, it's a situation that we will talk about in a bit. And speaking of a bit, it's right now. The New York Jets are expected to move on from quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Now, this is one that's gotten a lot of scrutiny. I think I don't know if I had to take the pulse of Jet fans right now, I'd got to say it's like 60-40, 70-30. People are upset. Um, Whereas the 40 or the 30 people are like, oh no, this makes sense. I get this. And I totally see both sides of this decision and the argument. Um, if you're on the side of like, well, we shouldn't have cut him, then your arguments probably are, well, who else is going to play quarterback? And with the cap ramifications to cut him, why not just let him be your starting quarterback? And though I get those arguments, right? I get those discussions, and it's like, oh, well, you're a more competitive team with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback than you are without him, and uh, you know, the probability you make the playoffs is greater with Aaron Rodgers than it is without Aaron Rodgers. And yes, all that makes sense. But if you're looking at it holistically, right? You're looking at what new head coach Aaron Glenn is coming in and doing, right? He's building a team, he's establishing a culture. And if you're just doing the box score thing and you're looking at the numbers, like, yeah, Aaron Rodgers makes a ton of sense to come back and lead this team as a starting quarterback. But if you if you're looking at it from everything that Aaron Rodgers brings, you cannot have him be Aaron Glenn's quarterback in year one. You can't, because what does Aaron Rodgers bring? He's going to be on the Pat McAfee show once a week, right? If he's a guy that's not shy to speak his mind, speak his opinion, and that's great, right? Like, players need to be themselves, they need to express themselves wholeheartedly, right? But one thing Aaron Rodgers is going to do, right? And one thing he's not going to do is he's not going to hold his tongue because it doesn't what he has to say doesn't align with your agenda, right? And we saw that last year with Robert Saleh, right? There were times where Saleh would say something in the, he'd say something to the media, and the media would ask him about it, and Aaron Rodgers would be like, "No, I don't think that's true. I disagree." Right? Um, which is like, it's fine to disagree. Right? I'm not saying that that's the problem. What I'm saying is there's a way to do that, right? There's a way that you and your coach can have a conversation and say, "Hey, coach, you said this the other day, and the reporter said you said this, and I just wanted some clarity. Like, what did you mean by that?" Right? Because I saw it differently. And Rodgers isn't going to do that. Another thing about Rodgers, right? He is stuck in his own ways of like, this is the offense he likes to run, right? Um, he doesn't like shifts. He doesn't like motions. He's those things. If you look at teams that are successful, right? Some of the most successful offenses, they use shifts, they use pre-snap motions, right, to help identify the coverage and what the defense is in and what they're doing. And Aaron Rodgers says, I don't need that. I can read a defense perfectly fine, right? And last year he had spent so much time, right? The Jets, I would have to imagine, like, the number of delay of game penalties or timeouts taken to avoid a delay of game penalty, the Jets had to lead the league. Just because the amount of times where a play comes in, Aaron Rodgers doesn't like it, he's changing stuff around, he's using up the whole clock, and then delay of game. It was the most frustrating thing to watch as a Jet fan because I expect this from a rookie like Zach Wilson or Sam Darnold or Geno Smith, but you're a veteran. You're 41 years old. Like this shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be a thing, right? And so, um, it was one of the frustrating things to watch, right? And I think if the Jets, the way the Jets did it, the way that they flew him in, they asked him to come meet with them, and they sat him down. They told him this news instead of like leaking it through the media or like whispers through the back channels. I love the fact that they did that as well, right? So, um, again, I see both sides of it. I see both arguments, right? You know, everyone thought that Seattle made a big mistake when they traded Russell Wilson, and they've been fine with Geno Smith, right? The playoffs 1 out of the last 3 years. Um, they haven't. Obviously, you would want to make the playoffs more than that, but um, Geno Smith has played respectable. Has been respectable quarterback playing the position, right? You look at when Denver got rid of Russell Wilson and they took all the dead cap money, and you're like, oh, what are they going to do at quarterback? And then it's like, well, they draft Bo Nix, right? And I'm not saying Bo Nix is in his class, but all I'm saying is like we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know for certain, right? So, um, I think there's some legit options, right? Like, yeah, you can't count on Tyrod Taylor for a full season, but could you convince like a Jameis Winston to come here and play alongside Tyrod Taylor in 2025 while you go find you find your quarterback in 2026? Do you get creative and you swing a trade for a Hendon Hooker who's in Detroit? Get him to come over. He's comfortable with these coaches and Aaron Glenn and Tanner Engstrand, who's the offensive coordinator. Uh, and maybe he competes for the job, right? Like there's things that can happen that we're not even thinking about, right? Everyone's like, oh, Sam Darnold would never come back here, right? But would he? Right? I don't think that happens, by the way. But like I'm just saying, we don't know, right? No one knows for certain. What's next for Aaron Rodgers, right? Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, they've been thrown out there as options for him. And honestly, those feel like the only two teams that make sense. Not sure if those are legit landing spots, but when you just look around the league, the teams that need quarterbacks, those two make the most sense. I don't think Cleveland, Tennessee, or the Giants are legit options. But when you look at Pittsburgh, it's got a win now situation. Um, he'll be able to compete right away. Now, would Mike Tomlin want that whole situation, everything that Aaron Rodgers comes with? That part, I don't know. I can't say that he would love it, but the situation totally makes sense. And then the Raiders make sense because you're looking at a West Coast team. Pete Carroll has never had a problem letting guys be themselves, right? Chip Kelly runs, innovative offense, but again, that's another thing, right? Like, oh, is he going to tell them no pre-snap motion and all that other stuff? That part I don't know. And then you've got Tom Brady there, who, Tom and Rodgers, they have a lot of respect for one another. Brady, he played the position up until he was 45, 46 years old. Rodgers is trying to do that, has said he wants to do that. And so, to have those conversations with Brady and be around him, I'm sure could definitely, invigorate Rodgers in that way. Or maybe he just retires. Maybe he's done. I don't think that he'll retire. I think he'll want to return to the game of football. But we'll see. But I think it definitely means Devontae Adams will not be back with the Jets. It's funny because as the Devontae Adams rumors are coming out that, hey, Devontae is seeking out teams in the West Coast, like he wants to return to the West Coast. It was like became pretty evident. It was like, oh, I don't think Rodgers is coming back because the fact that these two, the Jets and Devontae, haven't had much contact, you know, that pretty much signaled to me Aaron Rodgers is probably not coming back, because otherwise you're trying to make concessions to bring Devontae back as well. So I think Devontae Adams will have his fair share of suitors going into this offseason. Next up, Deebo Samuel and the 49ers are both open to a trade. The 49ers have agreed to have given permission to Deebo Samuel's representation to seek a trade. So both sides seem to think that the relationship has run its course. Samuel has aired his fair share of grievances last year with not getting the ball enough and things of that nature. I'm sure Kyle Shanahan is over some of that stuff as well. Also, when they drafted Ricky Pearsall last year, I believe I said this on this show here, but many thought he was a potential replacement for Brandon Ayuk. I never felt that way. To me, it seemed more likely that he would be a replacement for Deebo Samuel. So I think the Deebo Samuel replacement is already in house here with Ricky Pearsall. Again, he's entering his age 29 season here. Deebo Samuel will probably have to agree to a new contract upon a trade. So he kind of controls his own destiny here. Teams that were kind of thrown out as potential options: the Buffalo Bills, the Chargers, the Commanders, the Steelers, the Texans, teams that I think are going to be pretty big players in the wide receiver market. Now, Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, which one of those guys would I rather have? That's a tough one, because I think Deebo Samuel is great. I'm just not a big Deebo Samuel person. Like, I think the person is fine. I think the player is great, phenomenal. He's just not my flavor of wide receiver. He's not. The injury history, he's like a hybrid player, running back, wide receiver, which is great when you're like 22, not 29. I think I'm just, to me, would prefer, like, obviously like a T Higgins or a Devontae Adams but when the conversation goes between Deebo Samuel and Cooper Kupp, I think I lean Deebo Samuel there, just because I don't know how long Kupp has, right? If you told me for 1 year, right, which I guess teams making this trade are probably looking at it through that lens, then I take the shot on Kupp, because I think the ceiling is the upside is higher as a wide receiver. But with Deebo Samuel, like you're gonna have to manufacture touches for him. You're gonna have to get him involved in the run game and the pass game to really maximize his talent. Yeah, it's a tricky decision to have to make to decide between those two. Again, I probably uh, would lean Deebo Samuel, just because I think longevity is probably on his side compared to Kupp, just with the amount of injuries Kupp has gone through and things of that nature. But yeah, going to be an interesting offseason for sure when it comes to the wide receiver market. Let's see. Myles Garrett has requested a trade for the Cleveland Browns. The Browns don't want to trade him, but Garrett wants out. So these never really end great. It's really like a game of chicken, like who's going to flinch first, because Myles Garrett's probably just going to hold out of everything, and make it very clear that he doesn't want to play for the Browns again. And the Browns are basically going to say, okay, well, as we get closer to the NFL draft, do we trade Myles Garrett? Or is it something that they're willing to take into the summer and the training camp and then trade him for next year's capital? I mean, I think whatever you trade him for, it's going to involve capital if you trade him this year, it's going to involve capital this year and next year. If you trade him next year, it's going to involve capital, obviously, next year. But Garrett said he's willing to do whatever it takes to land with a Super Bowl contender. I think that's his primary motivation right now. Might be in the Browns' best interest, I would think, to recoup some significant capital for the former defensive player of the year. So would have to see how that ends, but it'll be an interesting storyline. And apparently Max Crosby is in this very similar situation. It was recently reported that he would like to play for the Green Bay Packers. So um, it's another story for another day. All right, NFL Combine is coming up. And that means we're going to review rookies, right? So I'm currently still working through my 2025 projections. About, I want to say a little bit like 35% done with the projections there. So I'm promising that we will find the time to discuss the early outcomes of that in the next coming weeks. But I want to make sure we get to the rookies with the combine coming up February 27th through March 2nd. Will be the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. And that means we got to talk about rookies. It's usually a fun time for me because I like to see how my prospect model responds to some of the performances from the NFL Combine. So it'll be a nice weekend, for me tracking that stuff. But when we come back in 2 weeks, that'll be a few days before the Combine, a couple days before the Combine. So what we'll talk about then, we'll talk about the top rookies heading into the combine, right? Some of the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and what we're looking out for some of these guys at the combine, and which guys will come out of that as risers, fallers type thing, right? So, and then like I said, we'll get some guests on here. That won't be in 2 weeks, but we'll do that for sure. And as the projections get completed, we'll discuss those, start trickling in with some of those discussions, maybe have some discussions with a guest about some of the early showings of the projections. And then next thing you know, we'll be in free agency, right? That'll be in March. And we'll see people moving teams, players moving teams, and how that impacts the 2025 projections as well. So until next time, y'all, always a pleasure being on with you guys. Make sure again you are subscribed and commenting, liking, all of that fun stuff. And we'll talk to y'all in 2 weeks. Have a good one, everybody. Peace.